I'm going to turn attention to my two colleagues, Tim Prather and Glenn Shewmaker. So Eric or Crystal, who's ever master there. There's Tim. And Glenn must be coming. Say hi, Tim.
Well, hi, Tim.
Hi. Okay. Tim is an antisocial guy, but he's here today in his office alone.
Yes.
And Tim is going to, and there's Glenn also alone in his office, but at least we can see you guys. And Tim is going to kind of take the lead here. But let me tell you that these two folks here, Dr. Prather and Dr. Shewmaker, were at the very beginning of the Rangeland Center. And in fact, the idea of the Rangeland Center came about when a few of us sat around here in the College of Natural Resources and realized that one of the problems was there's range people all over this campus. So I was in natural resources. Tim and Glenn were in the College of Ag. We studied a lot of the same stuff. So the Rangeland Center is really a place to bring all this expertise together. Tim is now our Senior Associate Director of the Rangeland Center, and because he's an extension specialist at the University of Idaho, he works in invasive species. He has his finger on the pulse of kind of what's happening between people and invasive species in the state. He also works very closely with county extension faculty, of which many are part of the Rangeland Center. So Tim's background in rangelands and invasive species puts him in a good space to answer some of those questions that Wendy and Seth just raised. Glenn Shewmaker, I hate to say, is retired. Congratulations on that, but I will miss you heartily. Even though you've always been across the state, you've been in Kimberly for most of your career. You did start out in animal science and then got a PhD in range and have used that to be the specialist, the extension specialist and researcher involved in forages. So I'm happy that you can take all that you've learned now into your retirement and continue to raise cattle with your family in that part of Idaho. So congratulations. I'll certainly miss you. Both of you guys have been in Idaho for more than, well, I'm not going to say how long, a long time, more than me. And you've seen the changes in the community, and I've heard many of you guys talk just off the record about the changes that you've seen. And, you know, we can read books, but I do like what Wendy said. She said that we often just, we don't pay attention to what it used to look like. We look at what it is now, and it's good to have that trajectory. So we've brought the two of you in to kind of connect some dots. And Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Karen. And it was really great to hear from both Seth and Wendy. And I want to say that it really is fortunate to have Glenn Shewmaker here with us today so that he can review some of what Glenn has seen through his career, both here at the University of Idaho and prior to that. Glenn and I have worked together for 20 years. And I would say in the last 10 years or so, we've worked more closely together, and we've even been teaching a class together. And it's been just wonderful to work with you. And I'm so glad we've got this opportunity today to talk about range and your perspective. So you've got quite a history, Glenn, here in southern Idaho, and so I was wondering if you could take us through what you've seen with your recollections on rangeland and what you've seen in the past and what you see currently.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, some of my first recollections of seeing the rangeland were back in the late 50s, early 60s. And one of the things that was real dramatic to me was seeing about 30 head of cows that had died from grass tetany. And of course they left orphaned calves. And at that time, the crested wheatgrass was relatively new. In that area, it was seeded in the late 1950s, early 1960s. And so the drill rows were prominent. It looked like a wheat field in the fall. And it really benefited the native range because cattle could be turned out on that because it was early feed. And that allowed us to defer the upper elevation native range. So that was a big change. I remember my uncle had rode down there for the Utah Construction Company at that time in the 20s, and I'd asked him, what some of those areas looked like, and it was just tall sagebrush dominated landscape in those lower elevations, and lower is 5,000 feet. So there has been a lot of change, but I think our perspective is short-term too, and so I think it's important to do monitoring, to document things, and then and look back. And so after my master's degree at University of Idaho, I took the range courses that I could at that time. And so I began monitoring back in the late 70s, and have accumulated quite a few photos, and a lot of things are recycling, different methods, different issues are recycling. So it's been interesting.
So I know you've got some of those photos for us, so why don't we go ahead and take a look at what some of these changes have been.
Are they showing yet?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Okay.
There we go.
Little lag. So, you know, one of the things that's happened is, as I was alluding to this crested wheatgrass, it was quite an effort to control invasive species, primarily halogeton and cheatgrass, Russian thistle at that time. But in some cases it was overdone. It was more of an agricultural effect. So that, you know, large areas were seeded, as in this case, there's about 13,000 acres of crested wheatgrass seeding on the Salmon River allotment. And to orient you, here at the top of the map is Jackpot, right? And that's the Idaho border. Oh, there's Jackpot right there. Right there's Jackpot. And does that arrow show up, Tim?
It does, yes.
Okay. And so here's the state border. And this area here was, you know, winterland for the cattle operations then, a lot of cattle. And so back in the 80s, these key management areas were established. And this is about 5 miles south of Jackpot, Nevada, and to the east of Highway 93, 5,240 feet elevation. And so this was a photo that Steve Dondero took when this was established, happened to be in September. But you can see the drill rows, you can see some brush. And again, this was seeded back in late 50s, early 60s, more like 58 through 62. So been 20 years, 20 plus years, and still pretty stable. And I've shown the precipitation over here on the right, and that's one of the things that, you know, you look back at records, and that precipitation really can have an effect. You can see some very wet years from 1982 and 83 especially, and then also 84, above 10 inches of precip. So if we go to the next year, 1985, and this is a frame layout, you can see the stakes here. But again, shows that the drill rows are just very evident there.
That's even after 20 years, right?
Yeah, that's after 20 years. And other sites, that's kind of what we've seen too. So here is May 25th, 1985. And In this case, it was 51% utilization. That's season-long utilization where I have it listed. If we go to 1991, you can see a lot of brush here in the background has come in and gotten bigger. And I really think that the sagebrush reestablished during the really wet years of 83, 84. And even before that, it kind of got started. But I think there was more moisture, soil moisture than the grasses needed, and the brush, it just happened to be the environment that it was suitable for sagebrush growth. Yeah, so 91 now, you can see the precipitation. 87 and 88 were some real droughts, and I think the timing was right, that the brush actually could use that moisture. A lot of it was very early, and so the brush was using it, which limited the grass, and the brush probably had a competitive advantage there. So here's a close-up view of the plot, May 23rd, 1992. I don't see any crested wheatgrass drill rows. I see a lot of young brush. And again, I really think it was that high precipitation 5, 6, 7 years ago, because this is several-year-old sagebrush here in these plots. It almost looks like the crested wheatgrass is dead. We were fearful in this site, and this is a good silt loam, deep silt loam soil here. But we were afraid we might have lost it. And in one seeding down on the south end of the ranch at Null Creek, 3,000 acres died, and it was on a little saltier soil, and less precipitation, less than 6 inches of precipitation for several years. So this is the same year, 92, with the landscape, and you can see the precipitation was pretty low from 88, 89 was normal, 90 was low. And this is only 22% utilization. But even with that 10 inches and the 8 inches in years prior and 9 point something the year before, I would have expected for grass to be there. So the other thing that I don't have the data tabulated is temperature. And if I recall correctly, this was an extremely cold spring, and that frost just really had a toll. Well, here's the next year, 93. This is June 27th. But a lot of that green there is not crested wheatgrass. That's flicksweed. That's an annual, winter annual. And although it's green, it's really not that much cow feed. So then we go into 97, and you can really see how the brush has become a co-dominant species here. And we had an extremely wet year in 95. 96 was above average, and 97. So a lot of sagebrush there. There's 99. Just over 6 inches of precip during that year. But again, part of that depends on when the moisture comes, and I've got a slide a little later that will show patterns for this. Only 17% utilization in this year. And now we're to 2001. I remember those years, 2000, 2001. We had fires. Everybody had fires. It was so dry. And again, it looks like the crested wheatgrass is almost gone. And if we look at the precipitation, we're down below 8 inches in the prior 3 years. And this year we had 80% utilization, but 80% of practically nothing is still not much. July 24th, 2009. Unfortunately, and I've switched weather stations. I was using Contact Nevada, which had the best record. Jackpot was, well, Contact was dropped and they added Jackpot, but they forgot to turn the instrument on or pay somebody to measure the data. So I don't trust this data at all. I'm sure we had more than 2 inches. And of course, in the data set, they note that there's missing data there.
So Glenn, that's a pretty dramatic change in balance between sagebrush and crested wheatgrass.
Yeah, and so part of this again is perspective, and that's why it's good to take a landscape photo and then a close-up plot photo. You need to do both, and I'm not showing it here, but there's also a utilization cage off to the sides so that you can compare it. The utilization cages are never big enough because they have a little microclimate effect, and the cows will tear them up eventually. But from this diagonal perspective, you can be tricked into knowing what the composition really is. So here is 2011, and this particular year there was no use, and I forget the reason for that, but sometimes these pastures are saved for fall. I just really don't remember it. The precipitation data here, I just can't quite believe that. It was definitely dry in some of those years, but it wasn't that dry. So June 8th, 2019, last June. And you can see again, it's a mixed sage and grass composition. And you can see the precip here from 2015 was only less than 8 inches. We had normal 10 in 2016, drops back down to below 6 in 2017, and 2018 is below 8. 2019 was low. 2019, though, the moisture came at the right time. It came in that May, June, April, May, June period. And so again, that's part of the critical thing to consider. So here's a graph of the Contact, and I've overlaid the Jackpot precipitation. And one of the things that strikes me is these cycles. Very, very regular cycles. And so, that begs the question, is the climate changing, or is that just normal weather, normal variation? And I think as humans, we have problems having a long-term perspective on what that is. But certainly there are cycles, and there's longer-term cycles, both for precipitation and temperature, and so that's one of the issues that requires us to try to be good stewards by allowing flexibility, and that's one of the things, fortunately, the agencies I think are believe in too, is the best drought insurance is a conservative stocking rate and leaving feed, so that during those drought years you can still maintain a cattle operation and not harm the vegetation much. So here's the rainfall patterns for jackpot. The majority of it's April, May, June. And that really does make good grass. So this slide shows the, adds the temperatures. And so the red line is the high, average high for the month. And blue is the low temperatures. And it can get pretty cold. Of course, that's the average for January, but at one time, the San Jacinto Ranch had the record, I think it was -45°F
Wow.
one winter. Utilization records are very important to keep. And I need to update this, but you can see we've had a very wide range in utilizations, and that's partly by design, but it's more, just the way it comes out. Of course, we only do utilization on that key area, actually going through the steps of estimating utilization, and with that variability in precipitation, that's a bit of an issue too. But you can see it ranges from the 20s clear up. The highest year was 80, and that's probably excessive depending on the time, the length of time that was grazed. But the target that the Bureau of Land Management has wanted us to use, they want us to use these seedings and allow those native ranges to develop better and restore. So that's part of the reason here. So some slides on the precipitation, and this is the last 3 years. We're right up here in this red zone, as is a lot of the Great Basin. And so certainly I think we are seeing some weather cycles.
What I was curious about for this first section, are there some folks who had some questions just for this first section? Glenn's got a few more things for us to look at, but if there are some questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A.
I think Eric will watch the Q&A for you. So Eric will chime in if something good comes up. So I would go on.
So why don't we just keep going on then, Glenn, on to that next section.
Okay. One of the other major vegetation changes that I've seen has been juniper encroachment on sagebrush grassland, and this has really come to light recently because of the sage grouse issues. This whole area of northeastern Nevada is very prime sage grouse habitat. Back in the 70s, Bill Baker from the BLM established some photo plots, and I think in 75, and I don't have his original, but he located one right on the edge of this, the lower edge of this juniper area. And so I've been monitoring that over the years. So this is the site. One of the things you should look for, and I've got the arrow designating this one rub brush that they keep using. One of the things that happens with these witness posts is cattle will knock them down, and I don't always get them oriented, or the camera's just a degree or two off, and so it comes out different. But in 91, you can see there's just a few junipers, small junipers, and there's a few more up on the ridge line. So here's 96, and this shows you more of that ridge line. In this case, there's our witness bush. Okay, 2001. 2011, and there's our witness brush again. Look how these have grown. And even this sagebrush right within my plot now makes it very hard to get a picture. And here's in 2019. So there's our same witness sage or juniper. And notice how these close ones have really grown. This sagebrush right in front of the plot has died back quite a bit, but look at that ridge line. So that's those early stages of juniper invasion that the agencies and our grazing association are interested in trying to control. And why did this happen? Well, this particular area has not burned in at least the 50 years that I remember. We've had a lot of juniper in the background here that was burned in that big, the same year that the Highway 93 fire was burned. So that took out a lot of those. And then previous to that, clear on the backside of that ridge, there's a big fire in 1966 that burned a lot of juniper. So again, if we compare this close-up shot in 91, and we go back to last year, 2019, there's been quite a change. And there has been a little bit of more cheatgrass showing up in here. So that's always a question of what happens if it does burn.
So Glenn, we did have a question on the grasses. When you look at that crested wheatgrass, were there some other perennial grasses that were moving in on that range over that time period also?
Not in that area.
Okay.
We did have a fire on a native site, mostly a big sagebrush canopy. They seeded, in fact, they pulled a drill right over the witness post and seeded right through that plot. And so crested wheatgrass came up in that plot for a couple of years. And then it kind of turned back to the native vegetation, which in that site, it's got a nice clay. It was western wheatgrass, now dominates that. So yeah, different sites, different soils, different slopes and aspects. There's so much involved.
Right. So then you had some changes that you saw to riparian systems too then, right?
Yeah, that's the other big thing has been riparian system changes. So here, this is the Trout Creek Gulch. We actually had I showed a slide of this back in a Idaho Section SRM meeting in Twin Falls in the 90s. And John Marvel was in the audience and actually recognized the site and asked what we were doing about it. So we had a tour in 97 and this exclosure, except it's not an exclosure, it was fenced in 96, I think. and it's still grazed, because this is a piece of private land on Trout Creek. And so it's grazed, and it's grazed very close, less than a 4-inch stubble height. 4-inch for the sedges is kind of our goal. But the key is there's only cattle in there 2 or 3 days, and that's at the end of the grazing season. So you can kind of see how this works. It's just filling in that whole gorge in this area. Now there's other sites that still have issues, but I would like to take John Marvel back out and show him this, see what he thought. The other thing that, you know, we talk about long-term cycles and weather changes. Well, this is another portion of the Trout Creek wash. And I've had 2 different soil scientists. In this case, it's Paul McDaniels, who was the soil morphology genesis person, retired now from U of I. And he's verifying the soil profiles we have. Well, in this case, there are 3 soil horizons, with 2 being buried. And where this white arrow is a thick layer of Mount Mazama ash that Paul had verified over at WSU. So here's one buried soil horizon. You know, the Mazama ash came probably, what was it, 12,000 years ago, 8 to 12, I forget, somewhere in that time period. Here's another profile with the buried A horizon right there. And here's the latest profile. There's another site on this where we actually found 5 soil profiles. Well, obviously, you know, this has been cut recently, let's say the last 70 to 100 years. But what caused all of this soil development and deposition? You know, there has been some obvious major climatic events or geologic events, you know, the eruptions. There has been a lot of change over the years. Oh, one of the other things that I did, we put out some tiny exclosures in riparian sites. We were working on exchange of use agreement. And in this site where I put up the fence, the aspen are just totally taking that over now. And so, you know, that's a good thing for the wildlife species and also riparian protection. So interesting to see what can happen over a few years.
Yes. Well, I think come to a point where we can entertain some questions then.
Glenn, I'll ask a question. What I want to know is how all the loss of this grass, how did it affect the wildlife and the livestock capacity over the years? I assume it went down, at least for the grazers. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's a good question, Karen. The Grazing Association back in the 70s took a voluntary non-use of 1,400 AUMs. And the idea was that when we made some improvements, water development primarily, to get better cattle distribution and a little more pasture division, that the BLM would restore those AUMs. Well, they've never been restored, but we've never really had a cut either. But that needs to be in the context of, in this grazing association, it's primarily BLM land. It's 383,000 acres, roughly 30 by 20 miles, elevations from 5,000 to 8,600 feet. but there's 83 some thousand acres of private land, and a good portion of that, 27 sections up above 6,500 feet elevation on Gullier Mountain that John Sparks had put together before he was governor. And so we get almost half of our AUMs off of our private land. And of course, the other private land that's scattered, the 40s, you know, the old homesteads, those are those are almost always on meadows, wet areas, high elevation. And the wildlife, of course, don't know the boundaries and come back and forth. There's always been a pretty good deer population there. Recently, elk from the Pilot Peak herd that have come through the Wine Cup Gamble have been utilizing that same rangeland more. In fact, I've gone to riparian areas in the spring and April, and the elk have already used the riparian area before the cows ever got there. Especially true over on our east slopes. So yeah, and the antelope have kind of always been there. There was a substantial wild horse or feral horse herd that was removed back in the 70s, fortunately, because they were really impacting springs, stomping them in, and they were, well, there was over 2,500 head removed. And so that was a lot of AUMs that was taken off.
So Glenn, have you seen forbs coming into that crested wheatgrass area?
Yeah, we do nested frequency on those occasionally, and I haven't seen it showing up on that yet, but that's a lot, is just depends on the year. But I think we are definitely seeing more forbs. I haven't seen much native grass come back in that area. That was probably one of the mistakes that was made when they seeded those large acreages just to crested wheatgrass. If they could have had a good native source of seed and or mixes, that would have made it a little better. I think more palatable for both the wildlife and the livestock.
So what do you think about opportunities for bringing back some of those natives, whether they're forbs or grasses, into that particular area with that precip zone? What do you think?
If you pick the right year, I think you could be successful, but you would have to. We can't depend on the weather forecast, unfortunately. You can for a week, but that's about it. But picking the right year and then managing. So on one of those sites in let's say a small area, I think we could graze it very heavily the fall before, get it right down 2 inches, and then do some frost seeding, and then graze it hard again that next spring. And if you pick the right year and right precipitation and temperatures, then I think we might have some success. But it's not easy. Mm-hmm. In some of the work I've done, even interseeding in irrigated pastures, it's difficult.
Yeah, we're seeing that at Rock Creek too. It's kind of a challenge.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to take over as we get to the end here. I want to thank so much. I want to thank you, Glenn. I think knowledge comes from books and reading, but it also comes from talking to people and just your lifetime experience. So thanks for being a part of the Rangeland Center, and your insight is invaluable. Thank you so much. I need to take another look at those photos. Thanks. Tim, thanks for being the moderator on that. That was wonderful. And now I am just going to give you a few goodbyes. I hope you guys will all come back this evening. This evening, Mark Brunson, who is a professor at Utah State University, he spent his career trying to figure out like who are the trendsetters among producers, who are the ones that start new things. And now he's going to help us think about, so you know the world has changed. Now, how do you go to reimagine the future? How do you think about making a change? The world's changing. We have to make some changes also. So please come back. I'm so happy nearly everybody stayed the whole hour and a half. So that's a great sign. And call your friends. There's still time to join up for tonight. I will warn you that the link that we used for this afternoon session is different than the one you'll use this evening. So when you register, or if you have registered, you're going to get an email that talks about a new link for tonight's presentation. It's a way that we can be a little more interactive tonight. So I hope you'll come and join Mark. I've heard some of the nuggets of what he's going to say, and it's really inspiring. So go on home if it's at the end of the day. Kick back and enjoy and visit with us this evening at 5 o'clock Mountain, 4 o'clock Pacific. Remember, you are in the book, you are already in the drawing for books, so I hope that you will be lucky and get that. If you have some comments for the speakers, you just want to tell them they did a good job, or you have a speaker, go ahead and put in the Q&A. We'll make sure that they get that. Eric, thank you for running things in the back and keeping it all going. At the end of this, you'll have a survey. We sure would love to know what worked for you, what didn't, any things that are interesting. And thanks to nearly everybody who stayed this whole time. So thank you very much. Thanks for a good kickoff of the Fall Forum. Hope to see you tonight or tomorrow when we're going to talk about some skills and some tools that we have to actually make that change and address new approaches to restoration and new approaches to managing livestock. So have a great afternoon. Thank you.